Hi all, my name's Christina Gerhardt. I'm assistant professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in the Pacific. My talk today is entitled Rising Sea Levels and Low-Lying Islands in 2050. And this is for the conference on the world in 2050, creating and imagining just climate futures. My talk today forms part of a new book project which is entitled The Atlas of Remote Islands and Low-Lying Sea Levels. So it's basically about the impact of rising sea levels on island states worldwide, but most of them are located in the Pacific. Thanks in advance for your interest and your comments. In Let Them Drown, the 2016 London Edward Said lecture, Naomi Klein called attention, as Rob Nixon's Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor had done, to the nexus of climate change, colonial racism, and poverty. But she shifted the spotlight onto the oft overlooked low-lying island states, and their current situation is dire. On May 6, 2016, scientists announced that 5 Solomon Islands have disappeared in the past half-century due to rising sea levels. Island nations in sub-Saharan Africa have been hardest hit by the twin effects of poverty and of climate change. A 2012 World Bank report revealed that of the 20 nations with the highest annual average losses in gross domestic product resulting directly from climate change, 8 are Pacific Island nations. Climate change impacts the world's poor the most, and according to Oxfam, half of the Pacific Island population lives in poverty. Very different institutions share these views, including the aforementioned World Bank, Oxfam, as well as the United Nations and the Alliance of Small Island States, or AOSIS, which represents low-lying and small islands at the United Nations climate negotiations, as do, of course, the individual nation-states themselves. Islands predominantly in the Pacific, but also elsewhere, are already experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change, and they are only projected to increase. Yet aside from occasional flare-ups in international and national media, typically in relationship to the storm season, which includes typhoons, tropical cyclones, tropical storms, and hurricanes, little attention is paid to the ongoing struggles and solutions of island nations related to climate change. In this talk, I present what impacts climate change will have by 2050 on 3 low-lying island groups or archipelagos: the Hawaii Islands, the Marshall Islands, and the Solomon Islands. They represent the 3 regions of the Pacific: Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia, respectively. In particular, I will answer the following 4 questions. Number 1, why do sea levels rise? Number 2, what are the impacts of sea level rise? Number 3, what are the projections for these 3 island chains by 2050? And number 4, what solutions are being put forward to address these impacts? As mentioned, this paper dovetails with my new book project, Atlas of Remote Islands and Rising Sea Levels. Number 1, why do sea levels rise? Sea levels rise mainly as a result of 3 specific factors, each created by global warming. First, while much of the discourse on global warming has focused on air temperature, with discussions about the need to keep it from increasing more than 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.5 degrees Celsius, the temperature of the world's oceans has also been increasing. According to the EPA, over the past century, the ocean surface temperature has increased by about 0.13 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.07 degrees Celsius. It might not sound like a negligible amount. And why does it then matter? Increased sea surface temperatures lead to harmful algae blooms, change circulation patterns from the depths of the ocean to the sea surface, and lead to higher levels of water vapor and thus precipitation, and generate increased storm seasons in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. We've been seeing this in both spaces in this past fall. The changes in circulation patterns from depth to surface alter reef habitat and lead to declines in fish populations, which impact both sea life and fisher people, and low-lying Pacific Island states often rely on fishing for food as well as employment or income. Additionally, increased ocean temperatures leads to thermal expansion. That is, when water heats up, it expands. Thus, warmer oceans take up more space. Second, the melting glaciers and ice caps are responsible for higher sea levels. Typically, summer ice melt and winter freeze balance each other out, but as a result of global warming, the melting has increased both in quantity and in the duration of the season, leading to higher sea levels. Third and last, the ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland have melted at very rapid rates. The increased air temperature has led to the melting of the ice sheets from above, while the warmer ocean water has led to an increase in melting of the ice sheets from below. As a result, massive ice shelves have been breaking off and melting at increased rates, leading to higher sea levels. As with other aspects related to climate change, a common refrain is that no one anticipated that the thaw would happen this fast and this intensely. An additional problem with increased ocean temperatures is that these waters, which make up 71% of the Earth, 3/4, are our biggest carbon sink, much bigger than the much more often discussed CO2 emissions reductions that are created through trees and through rainforests. According to the World Watch Institute, the oceans absorb a whopping 93% of CO2 emissions. Number 2, what are the impacts of sea level rise? Rising sea levels have numerous effects on low-lying islands. First, even what seems like a small increase measured in feet or meters can devastate coastal habitats, making them uninhabitable. Additionally, the combination of higher sea levels and increased storm seasons, unpredictability, and intensity leads to storm surges. The surging seawater floods housing, and this increasingly creates vulnerable habitats, meaning that residents have to relocate. Rising sea levels challenge not only human habitats but also animal habitats, creating a loss for fish and birds as well as plants. Rising sea levels also flood agricultural lands and upset the balance of soil salinity or salt content in soil. Salinization, or increased salt content in soil, is a concern because excess salt hinders crops' ability to take up water, so they dry out. As the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, has pointed out, quote, few plants grow well on saline soils, end quote. According to the USDA, quote, salinization degrades the quality of shallow water and surface water resources such as ponds, sloughs, and dugouts, end quote. Given that global warming also leads to droughts and depleted wells, low-lying island nations thus typically face water scarcity. They are challenged by the double whammy of scarce fresh water and too much salt water. The salinization of aquifers and limited drinking water, as well as of agricultural soils, makes life on remote islands increasingly unsustainable. Number 3, what are the projections for these 3 island groups by 2050? Recently, the UN Paris Climate Agreement was ratified with much fanfare. It will take effect on November 4, 2016. What went fairly unnoticed is that of the first 55 nations that ratified the UN Paris Agreement, half, or 27, were small island nations located mostly in the Pacific Ocean. Why? Along with the least developed countries, or LDC, which includes 48 nations, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, but also islands in the Pacific, the Alliance of Small Island States, or AOSIS, which includes 44 nations, has consistently been at the forefront of trying to make so-called developed nations aware of their situations. They were already experiencing the effect of climate change and have been reporting on it for well over a decade. Often, their statements fell on deaf ears or go underreported by the press, which prefers to focus on the US-China face-off vis-a-vis climate negotiations. In other words, what was once referred to as storms of my grandchildren by James Hansen, who's widely credited with being one of the first scientists to bring climate change to the attention of the US government through his testimony offered in 1988, this could be redubbed storms of my grandparents by Pacific Islanders. Some examples illustrate this point with regard to the Hawaiian Islands, the Marshall Islands, and the Solomon Islands. Unfortunately, I'll return to them in a minute. Unfortunately, despite the recently ratified UN climate agreement, most scientists concur that global warming will continue and, as a result of feedback loops also kicking in, accelerate. As a result, sea levels will continue to rise. According to Climate Central, conservative estimates predict that sea levels will rise by between 2 and 7 feet, or 0.06 and 2.1 meters by 2100. Less conservative estimates predict a rise of 23 feet, or 7 meters by 2100, mainly as a result of the Greenland ice sheet melting. According to a 2012 report, Program on Sea Level Rise by Climate Central, using data gathered by the U.S. Geological Survey, quote, sea levels could rise by as much as 19 inches by 2050, end quote, in what was described as a mid-range projection. This will not only affect island nations. Almost half of the U.S.'s entire population, so about 40%, lives in coastal states and cities. In other words, or more precisely numbers, it is estimated that about 3.7 million U.S. residents would be impacted, and particularly, and in order of impact, in Florida, Louisiana, California, New York, and New Jersey. But all states along the eastern seaboard are projected to be affected, as the most recent storms passing by have also made clear. In the Pacific, rising sea levels will impact the Hawaii, Marshall, and Solomon Islands by 2050 as follows. As mentioned at the outset, on May 6, 2016, scientists announced that 5 Solomon Islands have disappeared entirely over the past half-century due to rising sea levels. Luckily, these islands, which ranged in size from 2.5 to 12.5 acres, or 1 to 5 hectares, were uninhabited. But according to the report, a further 6 islands have experienced severe shoreline recession. As a result of shoreline recession, 2 villages that have existed since at least 1935 have been entirely destroyed, and the communities were forced to relocate. The Solomon Islands are an archipelago of 992 islands and atolls. The 2 major chains lie about 1,000 miles off the northeast shore of Australia, and they span about 1,118 miles, or 1,800 kilometers. The population is estimated to be between 560,000 and 640,000. And spread out over 10,810 square miles, or 2,800 kilometers, thus creating a very low population density. Yet the majority is nestled along the coastlines and increasingly compacted due to shoreline erosion. Of this population, 95.3% are Melanesian, 3.1% are Polynesian, 1.2% are Micronesian, so most are from the Pacific region. According to a 2013 report from the Pacific Climate Change Science Project, sea level rise predictions for the Solomon Islands are as follows by 2055, the closest year to 2050 for which I could find figures. Under a low emission scenario, sea levels will rise by 4 to 10 inches, or 10 to 26 centimeters. Under a medium emission scenario, sea levels will rise 3 to 12 inches, or 8 to 30 centimeters. Under a high level emission scenario, they'll rise by 3 to 12 inches, or 8 to 30 centimeters. The same. The report bleakly warns, quote, as there is still so much to learn, particularly how large ice sheets such as Antarctica and Greenland contribute to sea level rise, scientists warn that larger rises than currently predicted could very well be possible, end quote. The Marshall Islands, located about halfway between Hawaii and Australia, consists of 2 archipelagic island chains of 29 atolls. Each one consists of many small islets, about 1,000 in all, and 5 single islands. Together, they total 70 square miles, or 181 square kilometers. In size, the island's area collectively is comparable to the size of Washington, D.C. The Marshall Islands population numbers roughly between 40 to 70,000 residents. About a third of the Marshallese already live in the United States. And unemployment currently stands at 36%, a whopping figure. The issue of rising sea levels is key for the Marshallese. Most of the islands are less than 6 feet above sea level, and most are barely 1 mile wide, often just a few dozen yards wide. When the monthly tide is high with the moon With the full moon, sewage systems often overflow. It leads to higher risk of disease, especially dysentery. Additionally, the salt water has increased the already dire shortage of potable water, as the swells salinize the fresh water and render it undrinkable. Kili Island is one of the Marshall Islands impacted in this way. Its 600 to 800 current residents are descended from islanders resettled there in 1946 from another Marshall Island, Rongerik Atoll, where they lived between 1946 and 1948. Previously, they had lived on their home island of Bikini Atoll, but the United States government resettled them with promises that they would be allowed to return in 1946. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. government detonated or tested around 23 nuclear bombs on Bikini Atoll. Bikini Atoll's population is thus living in its third residence as a result of the U.S. military government's experiments. Many Bikinians suffer from elevated levels of cancer as a result of these tests. Their third residence, Kili Island, does not produce enough food to allow the islanders to be self-reliant, nor does it have enough fresh water. Its residents depend on shipments of food to survive. Its existing water wells have been contaminated 5 times over the past 4 years, between 2011 and 2015, by salinization resulting from ocean waves flooding the islands during high or king tides. And its residents face evacuation again, this time as a result of climate change. The United States Geological Survey stated that they will probably have to, quote, abandon their islands in decades, not centuries, as previously thought, end quote. In the Hawaiian Islands, sea level rise manifests in chronic shoreline erosion, seasonal high waves, damage from storm surges, extreme tides, an increasingly challenged drainage system with occasional flooding and increased salinization of waters, soils, and crops. These effects challenge transportation as well, as most highways line the coast and airports are located close to the shorelines as they are in many other places, and public health as flooding often risks including raw sewage. It also poses challenges for housing as homes are often built close to the shoreline. But according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, quote, Hawaii falls in a zone of slightly reduced sea level rise relative to the global mean, end quote. According to the University of Hawaii's School of Ocean and Earth Science and Technology, SOEST, quote, areas lying within 1 foot or 32 centimeters of modern mean higher water are especially vulnerable to the impacts of sea level rise by mid-century, end quote. So this negligible amount mentioned at the outset suddenly ends up, as we see, playing a fairly large role. On Oahu, the impact area includes the man-made beach and tourist destination of Waikiki. It also includes much of the Honolulu area known as Kaka'ako, which is a previous light industrial district that's been quickly gentrifying, with numerous high-rise condominium buildings there being built in the last 5 years. It will also impact, as on other islands and in other urban environments, the airport and its runways. The best case scenario for sea level rise on Hawaii by 2050 is predicted to be 1 foot, and the worst case scenario is predicted to be 2 feet. Except for Kailua, which is on the northern side of the island of Oahu, a whopping 92 to 96% of Hawaii's beaches are set to retreat by 2050 and 2100, respectively. Waikiki as a destination will decline, and this change would result in a decline in Hawaii's economy, which earns about $2 billion per year in visitor spending. What is being done on each island group to address the issue? On the Solomon Islands, according to a report released in 2011, the government has been undertaking a number of steps to address climate change. The government is mapping marine and coastal habitats to assess their vulnerability to climate change. It is assessing the health of coral reefs and surveying the extent of coral bleaching. It is measuring the quality and the availability of water, and it is working to make plans to deal with the increased likelihood of cyclones. It's also working to ensure food security given the increased decimation of the agricultural lands due to the high levels of salt. The Solomon Islands are, however, like so many Pacific islands, among the world's poorest, as mentioned at the outset. Thus, undertaking this work will require financial resources and support, often of better nations. In the Marshall Islands, residents often install temporary seawalls. They consist of various materials such as rocks or shells in fishing nets, thus porous or corrugated metal. It provides a temporary relief, but as the current president of the island, Hilda Heine, acknowledges, better walls are needed. The U.S. military has provided such a safe wall, but for its base in Kwajalein. It consists of riprap and fortified granite. Almost 70 years after they were first uprooted to make way for the U.S. nuclear bomb testing, in August 2015, the Bikini City Council passed 2 resolutions requesting assistance from the U.S. Department of the Interior to resettle the original Bikini Atoll residents one more time, this time outside of the Marshall Islands and in the United States. Already about 60,000 people of the Marshall Islands live in the United States, of which 20, perhaps surprisingly, live in the landlocked city of Springdale, Arkansas. Most Marshallese emigrated between 1999 and 2011. Under the Compact of Free Association, or COFA, which was administered starting in 1947 by the United States Navy, and then subsequently starting in 1951 by the U.S. Department of Interior, hence the request from the Marshallese directed at the U.S. Department of Interior, also effective for the COFA also effective for the Federated States of Micronesia and Palau. In exchange for military access to and use of the islands for military bases, Marshallese have the right to resettle in the U.S. and to access various U.S. domestic programs. COFA is set to expire in 2023, and it remains to be seen, given this expiration date, how many will make use of it before then to move as a result of climate change. In the Hawaiian Islands, SOAS has put forward the following planning steps. First, the reality of sea level rise must be acknowledged. It needs to be written into laws, and planning needs have to be established. Development needs to take into account future shorelines based on projected sea level rise. It needs to be stipulated that an environmental impact report factors in risks associated with sea level rise. Currently, sea level rise does not need to be factored into how and where development takes place. Thus, developers profit by building and unloading, and owners and cities are often left to foot the bill for costs associated with sea level rise. A no-build or a no-rebuild zone could be designated. The city could also purchase land from owners or, quote, pay the landowner not to develop, also called conservation easement, the report suggests, end quote. Given real estate costs in Hawaii, the purchase of land is of course very expensive, but as SOAS argues, numerous tools exist to secure the funding, quote, including increasing revenues to conservation land funds already in existence for each county and the state in the Hawaiian Islands, tax adaptations for conservation uses, gifting programs to transfer titles, reverse mortgage purchases, and transferable development rights, end quote. Lastly, the SOAS study recommends climate-proofing our communities. This would involve taking steps such as raising road beds or moving them up to higher ground, improving culverts and drainage systems, returning land to wetlands to allow for water absorption, be it from rainfall or storms related to wave surge. Of course, the best step that can be undertaken to avert climate change is to reduce CO2 emissions. Pacific Island nations historically are among the nations that have contributed the least to CO2 emissions and to global warming. They are, however, like sub-Saharan African nations, suffering its impacts already, and most severely. Entire nations, their histories, cultures, and languages are at risk of being lost. And these islands are also the canaries in the coal mine. That is, what happens to them is also a harbinger of the future that awaits the residents of coastal cities and shorelines, from Amsterdam in the Netherlands to Shanghai in China, from New York City in the US to Mumbai in India. The difference? Residents can retreat from these cities inland. For many Pacific Islanders, the sea level rise spells the ends of their nation's very existence. Thank you for your time.